Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. On the podcast, I seek out and interview entrepreneurs, leading business people, authors, tech leaders, academics, and generally cool people doing interesting stuff in the service and experience space. Check out the archive at adrianswinsco.com. That's enough for me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Gregory Kennedy, who is the VP of Marketing at Alembic. Also very excited because Gregory just told me before we press record that he spent a lot of time at CBGB's in New York back in the day, which for anybody who's a fan of punk music, hopefully a few listeners of the Punk CX kind of podcast are fans of punk music, they will get that. And hopefully Gregory's going to tell us a little bit about that, some of who he spotted in the shadows down at CBGB's, back in the day. But anyway, enough of that. Gregory, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
So, Gregory, for the benefit of our listeners and also the people that can read some of the highlights I put together when I publish these kind of podcast episodes, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, so I was born in New York City. That's where I spent time at CBGB's, of course, growing up in the 80s and 90s. And I got into advertising design very early in my career, worked in a major global advertising agency called Cara Digital. Most people are familiar with Cara. They're considered like the world leader in media. They even invented media buying in France. Okay. Cara is a French acronym for like radio and television.
Okay.
So yeah, they're credited with like actually inventing the concept of like a media agency that would like buy media and represent advertisers. And they were the first to really take digital seriously. So this was like the early 2000s. And I joined thinking like, hey, I think, digital advertising might be really big. And I was vindicated beyond my wildest dreams, right? So spent some time on the advertising side, and then went what everyone calls client side and became a marketer who specialized in marketing products to other marketers. So I worked for a number of different advertising and technology companies, a unicorn called InMobi that was one of the first global ad networks helping to drive iOS and Android application downloads, right when that was new. And then I worked for a firm that many people have known in the space, AdRoll. They invented display retargeting, and that's at a firm called Sojourn for 5 years of the travel-specific advertising platform sold to large travel companies like Hyatt, Hilton, Disney. And we offer them a suite of tools that help them do digital marketing across a number of different channels. Had my own agency for a couple of years. And then, I joined Alembic 4 or 5 months ago. So I've known the CEO for a while and super excited about what they're doing. The company's very ambitious. They have some incredible technology, which we'll talk about, but they're taking on the challenge of like trying to measure all of marketing, which is something that not many people tried to do. I do remember some initiatives back in the advertising days, but trying to get a sense of like, how do you measure everything, right? Like most people are focused on digital side, Google search, right? It's very clear that you can measure that stuff, but how do you combine that with the measurement across like all of your out of home or events or all the other kind of activities they do in marketing? So we'll get into it, but
yeah, no. So I mean, that was the thing I was going to ask you is like, because I know you just, the paint is just drying on your sort of joining Alembic. I guess you say 4 or 5 months, so you're getting your feet under the table, understanding kind of edges of the room and all that sort of stuff. But when I heard about kind of what Alembic was doing, and they're trying to, I guess, like solve that old chestnut of marketing problem. I mean, I don't want to use that kind of slight sprite. What is it? The old quote, and it's attributed to different sort of people, including sort of John Wanamaker, which is I know my marketing my advertising works. I just don't know which 50% works or something kind of up to that order. And Alembic's trying to solve that rather than just doing it from a correlative way. We spend more money than we get X. We're actually trying to do it in a causative way. And that was the thing that really spoke to me. So it was a bit like, oh, that's interesting, because you're actually starting to get into sort of some real leverage in many ways. And I just wanted to understand that, what is it you're doing and the problem you're solving, and so how are you going about it? What's the breakthrough, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I like to think about it is like, and I think the history here is important. And we use that John Wanamaker quote. I mean, it's perhaps overused, but it survives because I think it accurately describes the challenge in marketing that people have had for almost 150 years. I mean, he started in American department retail like in the 19th century, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this has been going on for a long time. People have known that like we're spending on it, but it's just really hard to determine like which parts are effective and which aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember like the emergence of digital, and at the time everyone was excited because the perception was like we're going to solve this problem. And so digital emerged, and digital does have a lot more certainty and accountability when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to how it works, right? And so what I think happened over the last like say 15 years is like you reached a point where there's perhaps even an over investment on the digital side because it does a lot of the things that people want it to do. And also the measurement piece on the digital side, if you're an advertising nerd like I am, it ebbs and flows, and signals that were available in order to do the measurement that we were doing, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, is not available today. So it keeps changing. But at the highest level, digital offers this ability to measure marketing in a way that you can't do across other channels, right? Which is like set the bar, I think,
Mm-hmm.
really high at the executive level, at the board level, and in the perception of just like the average person. They know a lot about digital advertising because Google is basically a verb.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody understands that website intimately, and they're a leader in digital advertising, right? Just like Facebook. So people have familiarity with it and they know that can be measured. And so the expectation is like, why can't we do that across all of our marketing? And so Alembic is taking on that challenge and has a way to do that across everything.
And the operative word is away, because the that's kind of, it's based on the kind of the approach. And there's like, this is not just like fancy technology because it's fancy technology, but it's driven by a bit of, I guess, science that's been transposed. And that's also the other really interesting kind of thing. Is it, can tell me a little bit about some of the
Yeah.
science behind it, because the insight that it's coming from, because I think that's a fascinating kind of like leap where you've gone, oh, there's that. Oh, we can maybe apply that to that and solve that problem. And I just thought, that is a, tell me about that. I'm not going to stop talking. Tell me about that, because it's a fascinating kind of backstory to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we like to call ourselves an applied science company. There's mathematicians and scientists on the team who have created the platform. So I'll take you through like our methodology
Mm-hmm.
and how we view the world and how we view measurement, right? So what we do is we ingest a client's first party data. So that can be their website analytics, that can be social media streams, that could be digital advertising data, that could be CRM data, that can be whatever they have, they want to share with us, and whatever we all decide is important in terms of like trying to measure their marketing, right? So we take the first party data stream. It's also important to understand that now this stuff's all available in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the reasons that this was so difficult to do 10 or 15 years ago, is data wasn't available, wasn't easily accessible. Now you're in a world where like everyone's using cloud platforms, particularly the Fortune 500, which is who we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So we could access the data. So we take all of that and then we instrument it to a outcome or revenue layer, depending on what they want to measure. So you've got, let's say, all this first party data, and then you're looking at it against some type of revenue layer, right? Let's use revenue as an example. It could be point of sales data, it could be conversion data, it could be other things, but there's an impact layer.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, we access third party data. So we look at, third party tools that measure the impact of advertising, television, radio, podcasts, other social media if we need it, brand surveys, the whole suite of third party measurement that most marketers are familiar with that they use to measure marketing, right? So we take all of this data and then we combine it and organize it into a time series. So we literally like lay it all on top of each other and figure out like what happened day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. And then we have proprietary algorithms, mathematics that's been developed at the company that analyzes that data. And this is where it goes really deep in terms of our use of AI. We use things we call composite AI that combines a number of different techniques like LLMs and causal AI and other things, right? So we amalgamate and combine a bunch of different approaches to AI and use that together. And the way I like to describe it is like what's important on the AI side is that the customer journey is so complicated
Hmm.
and fragmented these days. AI helps us interpret it, right? So we're interpreting, understanding, trying to like evaluate the journey that customers go on. And they have proprietary math that sifts through it all and tries to understand what activities in marketing are causing revenue impact.
Hmm.
And so that's where the math starts to get very complex. And we use something that was inspired by like virus tracking that they used during the pandemic, right? And you can understand the parallel between how a marketing idea, marketing concept spreads. We even develop what we call causal chains. So it's a sequence of events that the system has identified that preceded the revenue impact event that we are able to measure, and we use all of those to share with our customers to help them understand the impact that marketing's have, and we can even forecast it going forward.
So I think, I mean, that's the fascinating thing is that the idea that the inspiration came from the modeling of transmission from the COVID pandemic. And it sort of makes me think. Tell me if I'm right for saying this. So it's so you talked about using different types of data. That's first party, second party, third party. So imagine that's like, say there's a brand that's doing some outdoor advertising, and there's a big billboard, let's say, and it's next to a highway, and you can acquire sort of third party kind of traffic data, like volume of data and that type of stuff, depending on where the positioning of all that stuff. I mean, I guess those sort of things are going to be. Is that what you're talking about? You pull all that together and model it in a sophisticated way to help you really understand the impact of some of those activities based on all those
Correct.
kind of data streams. Because that feels like it's like you've got a thing, there's a stream of things going past it, and that's where the transmission inspiration, I guess, kind of for me makes. I'm trying to make sense of it. I mean, is that what you're doing? You're basically going to go, no, we can take all these different things, and based on this transmission type of mathematics, we can get a proper understanding of how impactful these different activities are out in the real world by used to
Correct.
combining all
Yeah.
these different data sources and flows.
Yeah, it's like they're all these measurements have existed, and I think the way that we like to talk about it is that every marketing vendor that you hire, they all have some type of tool or way that they've been measuring it, right?
Hmm.
So out of home, people have their own measurement tools, and just like you use Google and they have Google Analytics, and
Hmm.
that's how they measure their own marketing. Agencies have been using a thing called the MMM for a very long time, right? Media mix marketing, which are things is similar, and we get compared to that a lot of time. The difference is that that's manual,
Yeah.
requires a lot of data, usually like 2 years of data. It takes 6 months to get the impact. It doesn't have the flexibility, and it doesn't meet the expectations that marketers have today. I think at least in terms of like the immediacy that they want, and that's why you like that term immediacy, because I think that that's what digital brought was there's an expectation that you want to measure this today. And people want to know like I launched this campaign yesterday, like what's happening now,
Right.
right? And that's where we are today. So yeah, you're correct that like we're looking at all of these different things, whether they're like television. I think that's a really good example of a offline channel that people have struggled with, like how do we measure this and how do we understand that? And so there actually are platforms out there that are pretty good
Hmm.
at measuring the impact of television. And so we actually take that data stream and put it directly into the system, and then are able to analyze it on a pretty granular level. And there's not really anyone who's like taking it to that extreme. They're usually trying to do this in a manual way, or they've got an Excel sheet, or maybe even have a data science team who's like, trying to sift through all this stuff. But the scale of data that we collect is so enormous. Like we have our own hardware because we have
Okay.
to process this stuff at like a really big scale.
I mean, we'll come back to kind of the hardware connection in a minute, but I think the because I think it's fascinating around kind of you talked about the kind of use of AI to help and different algorithms and a combination of different techniques to be able to do this. My also question is like there's this horsepower under the hood, but are you also kind of using it to help because it also sounds quite complicated if you're like a user, I put it say
Mhm.
in inverted commas. Are you using the like artificial intelligence to also to help people navigate that journey and understand what they're seeing and how that's kind of working because it feels like because it feels like a complex proposition unless you're helping people navigate kind of and understand what they're seeing, if you know what I mean.
Correct. Yeah, that's one of the really other big innovations that we have is that we use an LLM to sort through all of the data.
Mm-hmm.
And in the final stage, we're able to present people with summaries and even make recommendations. And our vision is that the dashboard that people are used to in terms of like any analytics tool, you log in, you get a bunch of dashboards. Like we would love a world where that goes away and you just get recommendations and your systems are just telling you like, this is what we recommend. These are the top 5 things you need to know. These are top 5 things that maybe you should stop doing. And these are things that like there's no impact, right? So we even explore that. We surface that. And so yeah, so we have a system today that actually does provide these like intelligence briefing style updates to people. Of course, you can click through and understand it in more detail if you want to get data to justify the recommendations. And it's literally called justifying the dashboard because that part's really important, particularly when people are new and using the system and they're like, wow, where did this recommendation come from? And they want to understand that. And so we allow them to click through and look at that in a traditional dashboard style way. But yeah, the vision is like the dashboard goes away, right? And you've got systems that are just recommending ideas or providing you insights. And I'm very excited about that in general. I think that that's where all software is headed with AI. Is that the AI is going to be able to actually like interpret the data and give you recommendations and give you wisdom. I mean, that's what for many years now, I've heard that from other marketers, other people, right? Even at Sojourn, people would talk about that. They're like, well, can't you just tell us what to do? Like you've got all the information and like we want to automate stuff. And that's been a big part of like the evolution of software. And so yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very excited about that.
So for folks that are not, maths or tech kind of like nerds or wannabe nerds sort of thing, and actually going to want to kind of go, this sounds really interesting, but I want to know where the rubber hits the road. So, tell me kind of like, make it real for me. I mean, so do you have a couple of examples of clients, if you can name them or just describe them, that you work with and how they're leveraging kind of Alembic's platform and how they're benefiting and what sort of outcomes they're getting? Because it just that it will start to allow people, I think, that are listening in to put their arms around it, because the secret sauce is the inspiration and then how you've translated that. But then it's also actually for many folks who don't really understand some of that sort of stuff or don't want to spend the time to understand, they go like, I know it's magic, I know it's brilliant, I just want to understand how it works or what it delivers. And the stories and examples are a great way of relaying that. So if you could share a couple of examples of this, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it is public that we work with NVIDIA. And they've been a fantastic partner for us. And so NVIDIA is a really good example of someone who gets maximum value, I think, from our platform because their business is very complicated. So you start to think of the scope of companies like that. Like they still have a consumer business, right? They sell video cards that people use for video games, right? In addition to all of the stuff that they're selling, like chips to other companies, data centers, and all of that, right? So the business is like at a really big scale. It's very complicated. It's global, right? They sell in other countries. And they do a lot in terms of marketing that can be difficult to measure. They have big events, right? Most B2B or technology companies invest in events. And so it's really hard to understand like the ROI of an event. And so Alembic is something that they've used to help determine the impact of a number of different marketing activities. But events is a good one where they're able to understand like, hey, we put all this effort, energy into these events and like what are the results and things in our dashboard will help them be able to look into that and understand the value.
I mean, because I also know that there's a connection between yourself, not just as a client, but there's a connection between Alembic and NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, but also, almost as famously, Jeremy Katzenberg, DreamWorks founder, and also Joe Montana, heaven forbid, the 49ers quarterback. I mean, like you've got some famous friends. I mean, how did all that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're very lucky to have the support of WonderCo, Jeffrey Katzenberg's venture firm. And he obviously was the founder of DreamWorks. And so, yeah, like that's been great. It's nice to have fantastic backers who can provide a lot of value and, are huge advocates or for what we're doing. Like they understand too the value of like measurement in media, right? That this is something that has been difficult to do, and are excited about the idea that there's a next generation platform out there that's really going to take this all where it needs to go. It's like we started with the "wanna make" quote, right?
Hmm.
And so Alembic is one of the few people out there who's really trying to answer that question to the fullest extent, right? Like I said, with the initial narrative out, like digital bringing the idea that this was possible, and now we're just going to extend it across everything.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, I think that it's such a competitive world out there, and spending decisions are increasingly getting scrutinized, and people are being increasingly asked to prove the ROI of their investments. And I think marketing's always had it's improved, obviously, with digital, but there's always been a large part of it which has been as like you said, the Wanamaker quote. It's like, well, we know it works, but we don't know how much of it works or which parts of it work. It just works. We've got momentum, so we're going to keep going. So I think it's really kind of really interesting what you're doing and where you've come from. I think is really kind of fascinating, that inspiration around the applied science from what happened, the transmission mathematics that were modeling, that was mathematical modeling that went on, and how you've transposed that or used that as inspiration to try and solve this marketing kind of problem at a greater extent than it has been done before, I think is fascinating. But that all kind of being said, I mean, I know that you've been around the game for a while, Gregory, and so what I wanted to do is, rather than just talk about Alembic, is just like zoom out a little bit and try and benefit from your broader expertise. And wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the big trends and technologies that are going to drive and shape the future of customer experience, and what should we do to prepare for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think a lot of people are answering, or at least are asking that question today, right? Like there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around generative AI. I mean, I'm on the West Coast here. I lived in San Francisco Bay Area for 20 years. Now I live in Seattle. And so you've got this cohort of people that I interact with on a regular basis who are really excited about all this technology. And they think artificial intelligence is excellent and we're all using it and just are really thrilled about what's happening. But there's also the flip side to all this stuff where there's a lot of people really concerned, right? And a lot of those concerns are real. In fact, like, companies like Anthropic,
Mm-hmm.
there was an interview that just came out and like they just released let's call it an essay. And it's interesting for a company that's like a leader in the space, like how much they talk about the challenges and how they try to position themselves as being very thoughtful and careful about how artificial intelligence is going to be implemented and the guardrails that they put on their systems and stuff. So I think that like while there's a group of people and we should be excited about what's happening, I think it's also healthy to be smart about thinking through the implications of what we're doing, because the potential is there to like create a lot of even just challenges with like the job market. But beyond that, like it's unknown, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
exactly what the implications are of the technology, because it's so powerful. I think one of the guardrails that they put on it was like they won't let AI code itself. That was
Right.
one of the things that I was like reading about recently. So I think there's just a ton to talk about there. From a different perspective, I think there's a lot of like change that's happening in the marketing world as well. Some of it's regulatory, right? Like things are becoming more difficult in terms of like collecting data. In Europe, right, you had GDPR, which
Mm-hmm.
everyone at this point has heard of and is familiar with, and that like changed the way that data was being gathered
Mm-hmm.
and processed. And so I think we're still feeling that. And I think that that's heavily influencing like the direction that marketing is going. Some of it I'm really excited about. I think that like things like brand marketing are going to make a big comeback, because like being able to measure things the way that, the world that I described, like let's say 10 or 15 years ago, was entirely deterministic.
Mm-hmm.
Like we really understood everything people were clicking on, downloading and doing. And now we don't have that kind of ability to
Mm-hmm.
access that information. And I think that your reputation as a brand is going to be vital to your success going forward, right? Because you won't be so easy to just buy traffic in the way that people are doing it in the past. I also think that like the channel's just been saturated, that people have figured out all of the tricks
Yeah.
and they know all of the ways to like drive traffic and move traffic around the internet. And so you're in this kind of like arms race where there's a zero sum gain now. And it's very hard to take advantage of those things or do them in an ROI way positive that people were doing in the past.
Mhm.
And so I think there's going to be a big opportunity for brands that invest in building fantastic narratives and like, going in like slightly different direction, I think, than what's happened over the last 10 years.
So some of the big talk over the last kind of few years is, in particular in that sort of marketing and experience sort of space, has been the idea that brands want to deliver more personalized experiences, and consumers say that they want it as well. That's going to be the big thing. We both agree that there's been value in it. But yet, amongst all of that, consumers have consistently shared that they have concerns around data use, data collection, privacy, all those type of things. And they've been talking about this for years. And so it feels like some of the brand efforts to create personalization sort of like miss the mark in many ways. And then you fold in this initial enthusiasm for generative AI from the consumer space. People say, wow, it's crazy and it's wonderful. And then I've seen research that's suggested that there's an increasing unease about not just data and privacy, but also some of the use and application of some of this technology. And do you think that maybe speaks to this idea that some brands, maybe the more progressive brands, might go, we can take a slightly different approach and establish a slightly different relationship with our customers that maybe goes, actually, we need to build a trusted foundation before we can actually build on a more extensive value exchange between us and our kind of customers. So then it plays to those concerns that seem to be resonating with customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was just posting on social media the other day about personalization. There was a McKinsey survey that said 71% of consumers expect personalization or personalized interaction, and 76% get frustrated when it doesn't happen. And it was funny because like most people in the marketing world kind of laughed at that because the numbers are really high, right?
Yeah.
The idea that more people get frustrated when they don't get personalization than the people who demand personalization is like an interesting thing to discuss.
Yeah.
Right there, right? So I think the reality is a couple things. I think expectations are really high with consumers about technology in general, right? Like science fiction, and there's just all kinds of media out there that portrays things in a way that is hard, I think, for companies to execute on, right? To really truly personalize things in a way that I know that I would, if I had my fantasy world about how I'd want everything personalized, like I would want everything personalized. And so it's expensive, it's difficult, it's hard to do. And so to some degree, it's not always in the incentive of the company to do. A long time ago, I was doing an interview or like a survey for a major software manufacturer. And so a software designer in Silicon Valley that was like, they were just talking to users, trying to get a sense of like how they could improve their tools that I was a big fan of. And I told them that. I said, I want it to be completely customizable and do whatever I want. I want to be able to take features out and stuff. And they made an excellent point. They said that like, while they could make this like high degree of personalization in the software, it would make the support extremely difficult. And it was a really good answer, right? Like if you let people go in there and just remove any button and change it and just put their own skin on it, do anything, and then they call the support team and like, they're like, I'm looking at the Spider-Man version, and right, they just wouldn't be able to like give them the support that they need. So I think there are like a healthy balance of things that need to be considered when you do personalization. And, I think we're headed in a world where there will be more of it, right? With some of the automation that's happening on chatbots and customer experience side. Like, I think the personalization stuff is going to work really well with being able to automate at least like the first layer of stuff. Like the early experiments I've seen, I did some consulting with customer experience software, was that like the first 20% of requests are pretty easy to automate. So most people, when they seek help via chat or whatever it is. They're just looking to reset their password, or they forgot something, they can't figure something out. It's usually pretty simple. It's pretty simple stuff. And so AI will be able to automate all of that. And that alone, I think, will improve everyone's experience. And I think those new systems that are coming online are way more personalized, I think, than they were, because that's going to give the tools a huge advantage over, like, live support. Most of the people I've talked to too, eventually you can get to live support if you need it, and everybody always wants that. But I think that the automated option is going to become pretty good, and people, I think, will be happy with it. Maybe they'll be getting more of the personalization that they want from companies and from software.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious because it feels like that personalization has almost been, the personalization space has been dominated by marketing as an excuse to almost like sell more to more people, and rather than actually listening to customers and going like, well, customers go there, we want you to kind of respect our wishes and do this and do that. Like, for example, I think I use a very, very simple example. I asked my wife the same question yesterday, I think it was. And I said, how long have you had your mobile phone for? And she was like, oh, crumbs, for more than 20 years, longer than we've been sort of together. We've been together now for coming up for 18 years now. And I was like, right, fine. So your mobile phone is almost as unique an identifier as your name or your date of birth or whatever. So if you call somebody up, and if it's aligned with your account, then almost like it feels to me that one of the first things that you could do is you recognize that number and you call in and they go, Adrian, how are you? And that's a personalized sort of like first, what's the word? First impressions, as it were, because you recognize it's my number because you can do a lookup type of thing. And I think, I don't know why I'm sort of rambling a little bit right now. I think sometimes people, there's my frustration with the personalization sort of like space, particularly when we think about the future, is that I'd like for brands to listen to the customers more and respond to kind of more than what they want, and rather than just using it as an excuse to kind of try and sell them and kind of more stuff, and make it less about campaigns and more about engagement and relationships. But that's my kind of like soapbox more than anything else.
Well, I know. I mean, look, I'm super optimistic. I mean, from my perspective, I think things are getting more personalized, more customized. I think in general, the customer experience is a lot better than it's ever been. Right? You just have to think over like the long term.
Yeah.
And as cars go digital, right? Like with Tesla, they'll become personalized to the driver and to like your preferences or how you want the thing set up. Right? And you're starting to see that in a lot of different spaces and technology. So I think it's all coming. I think that, it's easy to complain and say that you don't get what you want. But the reality is that I think a lot of this stuff is way better than it's ever been. And if you think over scope of time, right, like 5 or 10 years, it's personalization. I think we even described like with the phone, right? There are a lot of people that do recognize your number. In fact, like we all recognize the number when you call each other, right? I get an alert that tells me exactly who person is. Right?
And so I agree. I mean, I think you make a great point that, if you look at things, zoom out a little bit and look at things over time, things have got better. You also make a great point that kind of companies, they go, if they make things super customizable, it's just too difficult to support. It doesn't make, the economics don't stack up. And and people say they want choice, but actually, and oftentimes they don't want as much choice as they can say that they want. And so I think the prospects are good. I think there's and I think you also say that people's expectations are very high and brands struggle to keep up, and that's kind of just a problem. But it's all to play for, and I think that's the thing. And what you guys are kind of doing is giving people a greater view around what is their kind of like their total impact, particularly in around their marketing spend and how they engage their customers. And so that's great. But what I wanted to say is like going, is there anything else you wanted to kind of like add or highlight that we've missed out before I ask you some kind of like quick fire questions to wrap up?
Let's go to the rapid fire stuff. I'm excited to talk about CBGBs.
There you go. Right. So I always say to people at the end, because we tend to have a bit of a rummage around, sometimes a bit of a ramble around a bunch of stuff on the podcast, and so I like to ask people to boil it down. And so I've been doing that by asking them to complete the sentence. And the sentence is this: if you want to improve your customer or employee experience, Gregory says do this. ... Complete that sentence. Gregory, over to you. How would you complete the sentence?
Yeah, I think that they should think of themselves as a customer.
Okay.
I think it's as basic as that, right? Like if you want to have great customer service, like go and use the tool, be a customer, go to the store, buy something, like go and really explore the product as a customer. If you're not able to do that, you can always hire people to do that. There's firms that even specialize in this, right? And that I think will give you a deep empathy with what the consumer experience is. And I think it'll instantly highlight the areas where you need to improve or, do a better job. Right. And I think that that's a great way to kind of cut through all the clutter, because when you just look at it from the consumer side, you're like, like, why don't I get same day shipping?
Mhm.
And like Amazon's done a fantastic job. Like here in Seattle, they have same day delivery for all kinds of things.
Mhm.
Right. And so as the consumer, you just look at it and say like, I want this. Like, and when you're internal, you understand like, hey, wow, same day delivery. That's
Right.
really hard to deliver on. Right. So you got to take a step out of like your current role and really think of yourself as the customer, and be honest about like, what is it that's going to make a great customer experience? Obviously like surveys, and there's other ways to get this information as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be my recommendation. It's very simple, very straightforward. Use the tool, use the product, be a customer, and think about like what would make the experience better.
Perfect. I think that's sound advice. So the second question, and there has to be a punk question because it's the Punk CX podcast. And so here's my question: what company or brand do you think takes more of a punk approach to customer experience, and why?
Oh yeah, this is great. So I mean, I already touched on it. I mean, Amazon's the obvious one, right? I think like they have just elevated the customer experience to a level that is just super hard for other people to achieve. Like the same day shipping, the massive value that people get from Amazon Prime, right? Like that started as free shipping and a few other bells and whistles, and now it's like includes basically a competitor to Netflix. It includes audiobooks. It includes all kinds of stuff, right?
Mhm.
So the way that they're able to just provide like massive, massive value at a low cost. I mean, that for me was like kind of the essence of punk rock, right? Like
Mhm.
going to CBGB, spend $5, and you got entertained and dove off the stage all day long.
Absolutely. No, I think it's here's a piece of pop trivia for you. I'm sure you probably guessed the answer. But if you went to relentless.com, what would
Okay.
happen?
If I went to
Yeah.
relentless.com,
If you plug in relentless.com, what happens? It's
do
not
I do it or?
Yeah, do it. It's like, it's not malware. I promise you that. It's not going to harm you.
Okay. Oh, yes. I do remember this now. Yeah. It's it goes to Amazon.
It goes to Amazon. And I think that's for me, it was just based on what you were saying around what they've done and how they've done it, because it's not been a big bang thing, right? It's been that they've just been on this slow gradient over kind of years. People, back in the day well, it's not that long ago, when Amazon was just selling books. And then it kind of expanded, and it just kind of kept expanding and expanding and expanding and doing different things. And I think for me, I love the idea that relentless.com redirects to kind of Amazon, because I think it tells you everything you need to know about them and what you need to do in order to succeed in this sort of like, that space. That it's almost a continuous improvement and continuous innovation kind of process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the way they've just constantly iterating on the product and always going back to like how do they provide massive value for the end customer is just, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so successful, right? They just kind of relentlessly invest, right? In providing value. I mean, the build out of the distribution network, like people thought they were crazy, but they did it, and it's amazing, right? Now you can get same day delivery from like an e-commerce website. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, no, incredible. So my final question, and I've been asking these recently because the world is a weird place. And I find myself, if you're like me, you wake up in the morning, you get yourself a cup of coffee or whatever, and you try not to doom scroll. But invariably, that's generally what happens because the news is full of it, right? And so what I've been asking people is, rather than actually kind of like, is to help us lighten the day, and let's end on a good news story or on a positive note. So, Gregory, can you tell me a good news story, or tell me something that you've seen or you've experienced in the last week that you've just gone, wow, that's super cool. It made me smile, made me feel warm and fuzzy. Just a good news thing.
Yeah. So, I was looking through this report that was a customer loyalty report, and they ranked like the top 10 brands in terms of customer loyalty. And almost all of them were technology brands. So Google, right?
Yeah.
Obvious, like people are extremely loyal. They go back to Google all the time. But the number 4 brand was Domino's Pizza.
Right.
I was just like, I almost can't explain it. Like, I'm like, all the other brands are like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, right? And then Domino's. Like, there's no other pizza company in the top 10. It was just like, it was unbelievable to me, and like such a testament to the idea that I think anybody can have an incredible customer experience and can generate incredible customer loyalty if like a pizza delivery company can do it, right? Amazing. In fact, like I saw the CMO of Domino's Pizza post on LinkedIn the other day, and I congratulated her for being number 4 on the list.
Awesome. What a great story. And so, I mean, they've done it. They are an interesting kind of company because, as far as I understand, they have really rethought how they approach everything, and they've gone from being, rather than being food first or a delivery first company, to being almost like a technology first kind of company. And it's all about the app and the website and all the all the information flows that are going to go back and forward. And because it's so known and so reliable and so trusted, and then the reach is so kind of pervasive, it's just they've had an incredible kind of a success run of success, which is fair play to them. And so that's showing up in the loyalty. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's great. But that's all I have time for today. Thank you congratulations on joining Alembic.
Thank you.
Kind of like, I look forward to keeping in touch with kind of like your progress and what you're doing, because I think that it's cool science that you're kind of doing, and it's very advanced sort of stuff, and it's tackling a problem that's long plagued the marketing sort of like space. And so hats off to you for that. So all the very best for that. But thank you for sharing your time and your insight with me today. That's been super cool.
This has been fun. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.